Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we're back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Tucker Carlson. Saudi Arabia and Qatar had apprehended and arrested Israeli Mossad agents planning bombings in those countries, posted by Apollo Delphi, and that's a cross-post from the Live News 24H subreddit, and that's from aa.com. That TR looks like, I don't know what that is. I think that's some Turkish source, I guess. But yeah, personally, I responded to a cross post of this on the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. I said, Israel will probably hide behind the anti-Semitism card as per usual. Somewhat related to this, one scalding hot political take I have is that the U.S. is close through its first Muslim president and its first Jewish one. Despite most Jews being white passing and most Muslims not being white passing, I think the actions of Israel are really going to taint the political brand of American Jews for generations to come. In hindsight, maybe it wasn't the right move to give an already incredibly stigmatized group one of the most geopolitically relevant countries in the world. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Reddit, normally, they'll upvote. Reddit will upvote anything that goes along with their narratives, like this does. But it looks like this post is downvoted mostly because I think when it's someone in the out group like Tucker Carlson saying it, Reddit will always will find a way to say, oh, it's if Tucker says it, it might not be true. But I'm sure if this was some woke person on TikTok saying it, Reddit would give this a million upvotes. But since it's Tucker saying it, and since he's more out-group coded than in-group coded, Reddit's of course going to be more skeptical about what he says, and that's what my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have The Iran War is Unconstitutional from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, I personally would say pretty much all the post-World War II U.S. wars are unconstitutional. But the U.S. government never seems to let the Constitution get in its way when it comes to whatever it wants to justify. It doesn't really, the Constitution, there's no really means to enforce it. You could say voting, but the American people just care more about the letter next to their name rather than the letter next to Washington's name rather than what they know about the Constitution, which is usually next to nothing. And it just goes to show you that it doesn't really matter what's in the Constitution. It matters what people in power are willing to justify. Ultimately, the U.S. government violates the Constitution pretty regularly, and oftentimes there's really nothing you can do about it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Only Dirty Liberals Question the War Plans Now, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a cross post from the Underreported News subreddit. And it looks like that cross post has since been removed by that sub's moderators. But so yeah, I guess I think that was someone in Trump administration saying that you can't question the plans, I guess. But yeah, personally, ultimately, I'm sure if it was a Democratic president bombing Iran, Reddit would make all the excuses in the world for them. But since it's the out group bombing Iran rather than the in group, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. Next, we have the Supreme Court appears likely to let stoners own guns from Vox.com, posted by Previous L3, and that's cross-post from the LOL subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think if stoners do want to have guns, I think they should be able to. I think anyone who wants to own a gun should be able to have a gun. I do think there are some people who probably shouldn't have guns, like, people with mental health issues. But ultimately, it's very much like it's my same take when it comes to abortions or drugs. Ultimately, if they're illegal, people are just going to get them illegal anyway. So, let people own them if they feel like it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Sinister Trump plot to steal GOP rebels, staff revealed, from the dailybeast.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think that's very nice of Trump to try and take, it looks like, Thomas Massey's staff away from him. But ultimately, if Trump can justify whatever he wants to justify, and a lot of people are going to defer to what the president says in matters of law. So ultimately, there's nothing you can do about it a lot of the time. Next, we have U.S. troops told war in Iran is all part of God's divine plan. Watchdog reports more than 200 complaints from TheGuardian.com, posted by LegioX. And yeah, personally, if the person telling the U.S. troop staff they're a government agent, if they're a government actor, if they want to say it's part of God's divine plan, ultimately I support freedom of speech. They can say whatever they feel like. But with that being said, I definitely don't think the U.S. should be going to war in Iran based on how some people view Israel in the Bible. I think the U.S. foreign policy needs to stop being so up Israel's ass, especially for such evangelical reasons. But ultimately, those in positions of power are willing to justify what they want to justify. If they want to bomb Iran and have the means to, because they're so up Israel's ass and they have the means to do so, oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have the latest On Point show from NPR about illegal immigration is excellent, posted by Hanson Miles, and that's linked to the latest episode of On Point from NPR.org. And yeah, personally, I think if people do want to come here legally, I think they should be able to, because but it might be hard, so some people might justify coming here illegally. Ultimately, the libertarian position is people are going to justify if they want to justify, if they want to go travel wherever they want to travel, they should be able to. But with that being said, a lot of the time when you get illegal immigrants clogging up the welfare system, I think it's important to maybe there should be some questions in regard to illegal immigration there. And ultimately, if I think ultimately, I like Rand Paul's take. He said illegal immigrants should be able to come here as long as they're not going to commit crimes and don't get on the welfare system. But a lot of the times they do those things. So ultimately, I think the libertarian position is people are going to justify if they justify. If you don't like it, that's fine. But we should never use the force of the state against people who are just one free travel. But with that being said, that doesn't entail them to any special benefits like welfare or any other government programs for that matter. Next, we have DHS spent $220 million on ads featuring Kristi Noem. Both parties are grilling her about it in the Senate from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think that's a waste of taxpayer dollars. But ultimately, the U.S. government can throw taxpayer dollars at wherever it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have House kills effort to release all congressional sexual misconduct and harassment reports from NBCNews.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, preventing transparency and accountability, one thing both parties can agree on. And I guess I would agree with that. Normally Reddit only says the Republicans don't care about transparency, but the Democrats really don't care about it either. And that just goes to show you how much of a uniparty they are. They would like to, they're not gonna expose themselves and reveal what a massive grift this all is in regards to stuff like sexual misconduct and harassment. That's very much how politics works. People are gonna keep under wraps things that might damn them. Look at the Epstein files. The Epstein files are very damning for the ruling class, but ultimately you can really solve them, and they still won't hold themselves accountable for it. Maybe there'll be a fall guy or two like the former Prince Andrew, but other than that, oftentimes the elites aren't going to hold themselves accountable for their own wrongdoings. Next, we have a former Marine Sergeant Bryant stood up in Congress to say that we don't want to fight a war if Iran for Israel while being removed by the Capitol Police. And that was a post from There Was No Attempt, and that's a cross post from the Whoa, That's Interesting subreddit. And yeah, personally, I do think, that this Marine Sergeant should have had the freedom of speech to say whatever he wanted to, but ultimately, when you're saying something in a government building, the state is ultimately in a position to use whatever force it wants against you, and oftentimes, well, you don't even need to be in a government building. The state can justify using whatever government force it wants against you, wherever it wants against you, for that matter. You could be in your own home, and the cops could break in, and because for any reason really, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it because the state controls the legal system as well. And yeah, personally, I think, they shouldn't have been dragging him off, but, ultimately, the state can justify doing pretty much whatever it wants to, especially when you're in a government building, for that matter. That a government building seems to be crawling with government agents, and that's important to remember as well. Next, we have Mike Johnson says enforcing constitution on Iran would be terrible. Johnson is urging lawmakers not to support a war powers resolution from NewRepublic.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a cross-post from the Law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think there should be a war powers resolution, but ultimately, as I said, the government oftentimes doesn't want to hold itself accountable for its own wrongdoings, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have U.S. Senator breaks the hand of a retired Marine for his protest against war for Israel, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the Underreported News subreddit. And I think that was the video I talked about earlier about them Capitol Police dragging off the guy for being against the war in Israel. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, especially that senator helped break his hand. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter well, ultimately, the state can justify doing whatever it wants to against you, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. The senator, he's probably not going to face any consequences, and it just goes to show you that, when you're in a position of authority, ultimately, a lot of the times you're not gonna you're not going to want to hold yourself accountable. People are always going to act in their own self-interest, and the U.S. government is very much a good example of that. Next, we have Even for Hexif, This is Disgusting, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's cross-posted from the Steve Hofstetter subreddit. And it's from a tweet from Republicans Against Trump. Pete Hexif complains that the press is making Trump look bad by covering U.S. service members killed during the Iran war. When a few drones get through or tragic things happen, it's a front page news. I get it. The press only wants to make the president look bad, but try for once to report the reality. And yeah, personally, I'm not going to lie and say the media hasn't, legacy media in particular, hasn't been biased against Trump. But ultimately, when bad things happen to the U.S. military, that's going to be something that people care about. So if you don't like that, if you don't like them reporting it, that's fine. But ultimately, they have every right to report on whatever they want to. I agree that they're biased against Trump, and if it was a Democrat in the White House currently, they'd probably find a way to spin it so it's positive. So it's positively for them. But ultimately, people are gonna say what they want to say, and if you don't like it, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you just have to sit and cope with it. Next, we have government gave $143 million in taxpayer money to a company that was only created 8 days earlier, posted by Paton 13, and that's a cross post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But ultimately the government can throw money at whatever it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Senator Tim Sheehy breaks the hand of a U.S. Marine protesting war in Iran during a hearing, posted by Paton 13. That's cross-post from the Public Freakout subreddit. And yeah, we'd already talked about this post twice before now, the situation, I should say. And yeah, I personally don't really care for it, but ultimately, the government agents, whether they be police or elected officials, can usually get away with whatever they feel like, since they have the monopoly of the legal use of force, of the state's legal use of force on their side. And that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Trump announces that he will now be picking who wins Republican primaries. Everyone else is to drop out, posted by Paton 13, and that's a cross-post from the Parler Watch subreddit, and that's true from Donald Trump. The Republican primary race for the United States Senate in the great state of Texas, a state I love, and won 3 times record numbers, highest vote ever recorded by far, cannot, for the good of the party and our country itself, be allowed to go on any longer. It must stop now. We have an easy-to-beat radical left opponent, and we have to totally focus on putting him away quickly and decisively. Both John and Ken ran great races, but not good enough. Now this one must be perfect. My endorsement in the Republican Party is virtually insurmountable. It's such an honor to realize and say that almost everyone I endorse wins, and wins by a lot, especially in Texas. I'll be making my endorsement soon, and will be asking candidates that I don't endorse to immediately drop out of the race. Is that fair? We must win in November. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. And yeah, if he wants to say that, I think he should be able to, but I personally don't think that's very democratic, just telling people to drop out if he doesn't endorse them. But ultimately, people are going to justify what they want to justify. Democrats really don't care for democracy that much either. They screw over their non anti-establishment candidates too. And that just goes to show you that, ultimately, I'd say the problem is with democracy itself. Ultimately, everyone's going to act in their own self-interest, whether it be Trump endorsing the candidates he wants to win and saying that everyone should drop out, or, pretty much any other situation in regards to elections. People are always going to want their candidate to win, the other candidate to lose. It's like how in 2020, all the Democrats said, Trump, the election wasn't rigged, our elections are safe and secure. And now and then 2024, Trump won, and they said, Elon Musk used Starlink to hack votes and fix the election. It just goes to show you, when it comes to democracy, people are always gonna say that when their candidate loses, it was rigged, and that just goes to show you how, ultimately, I think the libertarian position is get rid of forced collectivism altogether. If people want to have voluntary collectives where they have to make decisions democratically, that's fine. But on a scale of 300 million plus, I don't think that's at all realistic. I think we need to be honest and not have forced collectivism anymore. If people want to have their officials rule over them, they should be able to. But I don't think people should be forced to do so if they don't consent to it. Next, we have Senate rejects war powers measure to withdraw forces from Iran, from LATimes.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately, it doesn't really matter because, even if they did vote to withdraw forces, the executive branch has shown that it can just ignore anything the legislative or judicial branches says, and oftentimes it doesn't even really matter. And, so ultimately, people are going to justify what they justify. And oftentimes, when it comes to the government, there's nothing you can do about it, as I say pretty routinely around this podcast. Next we have, let's see if there's anything new. Looks like that's it for all the new posts, so I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.